Hey everybody, how's it going? We'll get started in here in just a bit. I can see people are starting to show up. Last session of OpenTofu Foundations. I hope everybody's gotten a lot out of it. We will keep these up on GitHub and YouTube. So if you want to revisit them, they're going to stay up there. We're not going to take them down or anything after the session. But if you also want to share them with friends or coworkers, feel free to do so. We are putting together a few other workshops. We did one yesterday on convention over configuration and doing infrastructure as code design for developers, making it a bit easier for them to use. We're going to do another version of that workshop in the near future. So I'll probably send that out to everybody that's, hey, what's up? Good morning. So we'll send out that workshop to the list when we get it scheduled. We did it yesterday. It was pretty fun. A bunch of people showed up. And then we do have another workshop on December 18th that is going to be on taking cloud resources that you have in AWS and generating infrastructure as code from those. Whoops, I didn't mean to put that comment up there. There we go. Okay, I'm still learning how to use a StreamYard. So if you already have a bunch of stuff that's in AWS or Azure, GCP, wherever, that would be a great workshop. And I'll go ahead and share that link here in just a second. So what we'll do in that infrastructure as code workshop, pop this link in here for generating IaC. We're going to use the OpenTofu import tool, and then we're going to go through a couple of different workflows to actually back out a really good base module with multiple workspaces. So the way we'll kind of roll that one out, that one won't, I mean, it's going to be a big workshop. It'll be 4 hours, but it'll be a very specific Terraform module that we're using. And so what we'll do is before the workshop goes live, we will share that Terraform module with everybody. You'll be able to deploy it into local stack or into your AWS account. It is going to be RDS, so it will be more compute cost than what we've tried to do in this course. But effectively, you'll be able to deploy that module, delete the code, and then we don't delete the code, just change to a different directory because you'll want to be able to tear it down if you don't make it all the way through the workshop. But what we'll effectively do is start from an empty directory, knowing what we've deployed, like what we have in the cloud. We'll have an idea of it. And then we'll walk through like how to actually find all those resources, like bring them back to the code, generate a nice baseline for that. And then kind of diff your like staging and production environment, back that out to a single module, and then use workspaces and TF-vars to drive your staging and production environments through it. And then at the end, we'll hopefully be able to use that module to tear down those resources. So it'll be a pretty good workshop. The link's there. That is going to be a paid workshop, but everybody that is in OpenTofu Foundations or in the building developer infrastructure, you guys just get in it for free. So feel free to share it with any friends. We'll keep that unlocked for a while, but I think after reInvent, we're going to put the little paywall up for it. So cool. So I think that's about it. It looks like we got 12 people here today already in here. I think some other people are coming in as our streams are booting up elsewhere. So this session today is going to kind of be going through just some different best practices and tooling in the space. What I really want to do is make sure that if anybody that's been in here for all 10 of these like has questions or wants to focus on something, I want to be able to have time for that. So I've only prepared about half an hour or so of materials because I really want to make sure that we've got time to bring people on and ask questions and whatnot. So to get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the week 9 code and I'm just going to copy it over to a week 10 directory. And then we're going to walk through some different tooling and then kind of talk about just some different practices as we go through it. So with that, I think I'll share my screen and kick this bad boy off. Okie doke. Okay, I've got about 45 VS Code windows open, so let me get the right one. I'm pretty sure it is this one. There we go. Cool. Okay, let me move this. Hey, Richie, how's it going? Everybody's getting in here. Okay, sweet. So we're just going to grab the code from week 9, and we'll just kind of work from there. So we are going to see some stuff that will actually change in OpenTofu as we work through this. But what we're also going to see is really just like a lot of the different tooling in the space. And I'll kind of talk through like what these tools are, like when to use them, and kind of how you can use them locally and how you can use them in your CI pipelines when working with infrastructure as code. So the first thing I want to do is I'm just going to kind of grab the week 9 code. I'm going to drop it in here. So I got that. What is this README? That's the actual README for the session. I won't do that. So I'm just going to start with this week 10 code here. Let me pop open another terminal. I'll make my font a bit bigger as well. Okie dokie, export one. Sorry. Okie doke, and then let me just grab, I'll pop the README in here too. Might use this as a scratch pad for writing some stuff. Okie doke. How's that font wise? Good. Everybody can see that. We spend probably the bulk of our time actually over here in this shell as we kind of go through the different tools. Okay, sweet. So yeah, so what we're going to do today is we're going to go through this in, I think, an interesting way, I think a fun way. We're going to go through these tools by setting up pre-commit and kind of turning on a bunch of different rules or hooks in pre-commit. And what this does is it does a couple of things. One, I don't know who's a fan of pre-commit. I love it. I think it's great. I put it in almost all my projects. But, you know, one of the things that I think kind of sucks about infrastructure as code is it's hard. You're not running it locally, right? I mean, you can run it locally, but like, it's going to be in CI. That's where it's really going to run, right? You know, we don't have a production environment that our infrastructure as code is running in. Its prod is CI/CD, right? So what's really nice about pre-commit is one of the things that is extremely frustrating to, I think, anybody who's seasoned in writing infrastructure as code, anybody who's seasoned in writing code whatsoever, like that push and pray model of CI/CD just sucks, right? Like pushing it up there and, oh, look, it failed. And one of the nice things about pre-commit is there's so much stuff to your Terraform that like can be wrong before it hits CI/CD where it's going to actually run. I feel like it's one of those fatigue things that when you're first starting to learn infrastructure as code, you're writing it, maybe you validate locally, and then you push, and you're like, oh man, all this stuff's wrong, and you kind of do that push and push and push and push and push. And one of the things that's really nice about having pre-commit is just having a lot of that stuff just kind of done and handled for you as you're working. Things like format and validate, right? A lot of the stuff that throughout this workshop we've kind of run over and over and over again. I love just having that there. I have like format usually set up like on save for me personally, but just knowing that anybody on my team that may not use, you know, something that formats the code on save, if they got pre-commit, they're going to get a format before they push, right? It's going to keep us from having, you know, really goofy diffs. Why did this change? Right? Everybody's got the same formatting. It's going to stop people from giving you that anemic, you know, pull request comment of like, hey, then can you format this correctly? And then we'll look at TF-lint as well. TF-lint, so a lot of the tooling in the space that's Terraform specific works for OpenTofu as well, since they're both compatible. So we'll look at TF-lint. And TF-lint is great. It'll catch a lot of things, but it's not like a pedantic linter like you might have in like Node.js or whatnot. So it's not going to grab things like, you didn't have consistent naming conventions of your resources. It's more about like the actual Terraform code itself than your naming. And so we'll talk a bit about naming. And I'll also share a pretty decent resource in the community. It's Anton, I believe the last name is Babenko's Terraform Best Practices. I think it's a really great resource, particularly for writing your code. Like you'll see there's a lot of really good stuff in there about like how to name the resources, how to name your outputs. I think that's all great. I agree with most of the stuff there. And then we'll also talk a little bit about what I don't agree with there. And I think that honestly, one of the things that we've done in our space since 2015-ish, when Terraform is in that 0 point whatever range, has kind of almost like poisoned the well, I'd say, a bit. And one of those things is making a directory for each one of your environments and then putting your infrastructure as code in that. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we're kind of working through this, and why I don't think it's a good fit, and why, if you're trying to roll out infrastructure as code, why that is going to piss off everyone on your team that's going to end up having to do this. So, so if the font size looks good, I'm ready to rip. So what we're going to do first is I'm just going to remove the word font here. And so we're going to do most of this from Z Shell here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set up pre-commit. So if you haven't used it before, you'll probably need to just download the pre-commit binary. You can brew install it. You could probably Docker run it. It'd be a little confusing, but brew install it, apt install it, whatever. I've already got it installed. You do have to hook it into your Git. What code do you start off with? Week 9 on GitHub main, or the result of last week? Is the specified code relevant? No, it's not. So, I mean, you can just grab the week 9 folder. That's what I did. I just grabbed, I think, Chris's week 9 from last week. But if you've been coding on the week 9 and like doing challenges on it, you can use it after the challenges. What we'll see is, a lot of the rules are going to pass. We're going to have a couple of them that did fail. I was actually hoping that not having pre-commit installed from the beginning, we'd have more broken stuff to go in. But I think Chris and Dave and Michael's Terraform muscle memory was strong enough to do a lot of the things that it would have caught. I ran a pre-commit earlier and was sad that it didn't have more things for us to fix. So I mean, it's great if you've got code that you've modified from week 9. Cool. It might catch some stuff that you've added there. So I'd say that's great. Use the one that we've been working on for sure. Sweet. So I'm going to go ahead and add this pre-commit config. There we go. And then one other thing I'm going to do here, I'm actually going to copy and paste this. I'll explain this in a second, but let me just kind of open this up so we can see what we're doing here. So I added this pre-commit config. We'll pop this open. So we'll be doing a lot of work in this pre-commit config and then kind of running pre-commit over here, seeing what it thinks about our code. So one of the things that I just give a little heads up in this pre-commit config, what I'm going to do is I'm going to limit it to my week 10 folder. And when I do that, what's going to happen is pre-commit's going to just dump warnings left and right about like my actual pre-commit config. I wouldn't do this in prod. I'm only doing this because I don't want pre-commit to run on 10 weeks of this, which it gets slower and slower and slower the more code you add to it. So I'm gonna add a little thing up here at the top just to save myself a little heartache. I'd say add the same, but you can usually just drop this in the base directory of a module and not have to worry about the warning messages that we're going to see. So what I'm going to do in my pre-commit config is I'm just going to use a YAML anchor to kind of sequester off week 10. I think that's right. And so if you're not familiar with YAML anchors, YAML's magic. There's so much sweet stuff that you can do in YAML. I love it. I'm sure people in Norway still hate it or whatever because of that no thing, but I don't know, structure your data better. It's not a problem. So we're going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and tie in just one repo here, which is the OpenTofu repo. So there's a GitHub organization called Tofu Utils that has a bunch of different OpenTofu utilities, and they have a bunch of pre-commit hooks already set up there. So I'm going to grab that one, which is just github.com/tofuutils. I think it's pre-commit OpenTofu. Let me double check really quick. Yeah, that's the one. I'll drop the link here for anyone following along. Okay, so let me give myself a little more space. So we're going to go ahead and add this repo. This repo has a bunch of rules that are already baked into it. I think the current version is 1.0. So it's not like, if you haven't used pre-commit before, it's not necessarily like a Simver version here, even though it looks like a Simver, it's just a Git tag. So they tag their versions with V, so you have to put the V on the front of it. Your mileage may vary if that's consistent across all pre-commit stuff. And then we can go ahead and we can start enabling hooks. And so what we're going to do is we're going to enable like one of these tools at a time, run it, talk about what it's doing, and talk kind of, for some of them, we'll talk a bit about like the different tools that are in the space and like what the difference is. One of the things that you'll see as you're starting to get into like the compliance and security side of these tools are, they are as numerous as there are IaC tools, right? So, you know, you got OpenTofu, you got Terraform, you got Ansible, Chef, we have a whole bunch of these tools. As soon as you get into compliance and security side, scanning side, linting side, there's just, for every single tool in the space, there's just there's a vast number of these tools. So we'll talk through a couple of the security scanning tools here in just a little bit. Now, the first one I'm going to add is, and if you look in that GitHub repo, it'll have all the hooks in there that it has. So we're just going to kind of turn them on one by one rather than just like globbing everything in here and running it. And I'm pretty sure the first one will be just cool. I think it'll just be good to go. I am going to limit it to week 10. So this is why I added that week 10 at the top, so I wasn't having to copy and paste this regex over and over again. And let's go ahead and run this thing. Commit, run. Sweet. So my format passed. So what I did here is I did pre-commit run all files. We're just going to tell it to run on everything. So normally pre-commit will, I think, only run on what's changed, but since we haven't changed anything yet, there's nothing to change. So you can see that ran and worked. That's cool. That means whoever set this week 9 up formatted the stuff correctly. If I go in here and grab maybe this instance, you know, I come in here, I throw a couple of spaces, you know, misalign this stuff, right? My pre-commit should fix everything. Should fix, it didn't fix my new lines, but it fixes my spacing. Is that what it does? Or do my autosave? Oh, my autosave is getting me. My autosave is getting me. Let me bastardize some stuff and then save without formatting. There we go. Bingo. There we go. So that one's cool. It failed it. It should have made that change for me. Sorry, somebody's trying to sell me something. So format's cool. Just keeps your code formatted. It's nice. If you got your save thing, you know, you might not ever see this one, but it's one of those ones that's nice just because you never know what people have in their editors when you start working with the team. So we'll throw that one in there. And that's just running the tofu format command under the hood. Now, this next one is another one that we've probably run a bunch, right? So, you know, what's cool about what's happening here, this might be a little bit transparent, but you know, I've got 2 modules here. So that format actually ran on both, which is pretty cool, right? The next one that we're going to run is also just a tofu command under the hood, and that is tofu validate. And so what that's going to do is it's actually going to walk through and validate all of my resources. So what I will say with this one is this is cool. This is a nice one if you're doing a bunch of work and you got a bunch of Terraform modules or OpenTofu modules in your repo. It's cool. It'll go through and it'll validate all of them. The catch is it's going to validate all of them. And so to validate all of them, it's got to download the modules. So we're going to add this one, and then I'm going to immediately comment it out so that we all don't, you know, get gray hairs by the end of this hour. So tofu validate, very similar. I'm just going to lock this down to week 10. And now we should be able to run that. And you'll see this one will probably take like a minute or so. It's going to go into both of those directories, download all the modules, and then run tofu validate just to make sure that the code is sane and safe. And then we'll comment this one out here in just a second, and we'll move on to some of the other ones. I think some of the other ones are much cooler, but these are really good baselines to have in. So got some big modules in here. It's downloading providers and all that stuff as well. Okay, well, we'll let that run. We'll move on with our life. The next one that we're going to add in here is tofu provider lock, and then we'll talk a little bit about what this is actually doing. So, man, validate. It really takes a long time. It did rain here in California last night, and my internet always sucks for like 2 days after it rains. You guys figure that one out. So it's probably just how bad my signal is between this and the stream. So let's go ahead and we'll add tofu providers lock. So this is another rule that's in there. We'll limit it to week 10. That one finally finished. And what you'll see is, I think the validate did it as well. I'm going to rip this out. I'll pull this validate off. And then we'll run this one. And so what the provider lock is, it's going to lock down all the versions of my resources based off of my pins. And you're going to see a couple of files dump out here on the other side. Validate will do this as well, but this one has some additional logic in it. And then we'll pop open these provider lock files and talk about those. I'm not sure if we've actually gone into these in the workshop. But what the lock files are is they're very similar to something like, you can actually see it. So it's working on the DB instance one now. Now it's going to move over to the AWS instance one. I'm not sure if there's like parallelism or anything that you can do in pre-commit, but that would be pretty tight. So what this did is it went in and it looked at my Terraform versions that I have pinned and essentially generated hashes for all the stuff that I have. And so what's nice about this is there's a lot of versions that we have in our Terraform as it gets larger and larger. And so when you actually create these lock files, what's nice is you might have a team, and this is down to your team's, I think, the cadence of how fast you're writing Terraform, how much maintenance you're doing, et cetera, how you pin your versions. I know teams that just pin to the major. There's like, hey, it's 5, I'll take it. 5.78, 5.88, 5.98. I don't care, I'll take it. I want to always be on the newest features. And that's great. I mean, if you have the bandwidth on your team maintenance-wise to stay on top of minor versions, fantastic. A lot of teams don't have the time, right? And so they'll just kind of want to pin it down to a patch level. And so what's really nice about this is, like, you don't know what the rest of the characters are going to be, right? And so pinning this gives you that consistency between local and CI, where this is going to be running, that you're getting the same version, right? So, usually I'd say with most of the providers, like a patch level change isn't a big deal. You can probably just go ahead and grab the next version. But when you start getting to the minors, that's where you start seeing warnings. That's where you start seeing maybe new features that hopefully didn't break anything, but we never know, right? So what's really nice about this is just getting that lock in there, having that locked so that everybody has the same thing. Me and Dave and Chris, we all have the same version locally, even if we have a different version of Terraform or different versions of the providers, like locally. Next time I run it, I'm going to get the newer version of that provider. So just keeping everybody in sync and keeping CI in sync with that, with what everybody's developing, I think is pretty keen. This is another one that I'm going to comment out as I work through this. And these are usually ones, it's like, kind of sucks, right? It's like, they're the slower ones, especially validate. It's one of the slower ones, but like none of the other rules really matter if the code's not valid, right? So I will keep it at the end and comment it out as we work through this, but it's one of those that like might make more sense, like closer to the top of your pipeline. And so, yeah, YMMV. Okay, sweet. So we got that one. And so now the next one is, we're gonna have to run one more command for the next one before we can actually run it. But the next one's pretty tight. And before we do that, what we're gonna do is hop over here. Okay, dokie. Let me I'm gonna go copy and paste this because I can never remember exactly what it is. -E. AWS instance, AWS DB instance. I don't know how to use a computer. I missed the directory. What I'm doing is I'm just creating a README in each of these directories that has. Do I really not know how to use a computer? Did I spell that wrong? AWS instance. AWS DB instance. No such file or directory. What am I doing? AWS DB. I do not know how to spell. Delete this and delete it twice. I'm not going to rewrite that code. Okay, sweet. Bashfoo. So what I was doing is I was just creating this README that has these two little comments in it. So the next tool that we're going to use is going to auto-generate our docs, and it's going to inject it between these two kind of code fences here. And so if you go into, where is this at? OpenTofu. I copied this from another repo, OpenTofu TF docs, hook pre-commit. It is in the tofu utils. I'll send the link here for anybody who's following. He doesn't want to try to type all that from the exact spot. Begin, there we go. Okay, I'll drop that link here. And so what's going to happen is when we add this next one, it's going to look at our modules, and then it's going to take the providers, the resources, inputs and outputs, and it's going to generate a big markdown table and kind of just blob that into the middle of this, which is nice, having some nice documentation for everybody. If we've been good about our descriptions and our names, like that'll all show up there as well. Let's see how we did, but let's go ahead and pop this one on. So it is tofu docs, same constraint on the files, and we'll go ahead and rerun this. And this one's pretty fast. Boom, there we go. I'll pop this over here really quick, and then we'll just preview it. There we go. And so what that did is it went into each of my modules that I have in this directory. It will put the requirements, provider versions, the pins, the versions that we got. If we have submodules in here, it'll catalog all the submodules that we're using, Terraform or OpenTofu submodules, not good submodules. It puts all the resources that you use in here, and then it'll actually come through and document all the different inputs, their descriptions, their types, their defaults, whether or not they're required, and then the outputs as well. So it's just a really great way to keep your modules kind of documented. It's going to replace anything you have in there. And you can put this anywhere in your README that makes sense for your modules. There's a lot of different config options for the docs too. So, but this one's a good one to just kind of toss in there. It's great. Like talk about finger fatigue, like when you're working on modules all the time, like just having to not think about updating your docs constantly. Now, the one thing that is obnoxious, if you have somebody that comes in here and starts fiddling with this, their stuff's going to get blown away next time it happens. And we'll pop open this other one really quick too. Just so you can see the instance. You can see this instance here. Gosh, they still haven't addressed this. That one's an eyesore to me. Because whenever you start using objects, it's just like, I'll just put the whole object in there. I don't like that. But it is what it is. I can complain about it, or I can go fix it. And I'm just gonna choose complaining about it. Okay, sweet. So that's TF docs. So we're building up a pretty good little pre-commit here. Now we'll keep the docs one on. That one's not slow. That one's not concerning to me. But the next ones that we're going to see here we're going to start working through some of the more interesting ones. And so I'm going to add one, and then we'll actually see. This is probably going to spit out some things for us to fix. We'll go through, fix those, run it again, and then I'll talk about kind of the tooling in this particular space. So the one that we're going to add is a tool called Chekhov. Tofu Chekhov. That looks about right. If not, pre-commit will let me know in a second. And so what Chekhov is it's a scanning tool for infrastructure as code that lets you know if you haven't met particular conventions, particularly around security and compliance and whatnot. And so what you're going to find is, I don't know if anybody, tell me if you all know this or not, but when you get on the internet, there's some people that are more opinionated than others. And so Chekhov and all these scanning tools, they're written by opinionated people working on security and compliance and whatnot. And so what we'll see is it's going to give us some things to fix, and we'll go fix those. But we might see something that we don't want to fix, right? We got some legacy code, we got some legacy service, and we can't change this thing, right? Let's say this is terrible. I don't have this, just a scenario, but let's say I've got a database that somebody built on RDS 4 years ago, doing some click ops. We're starting to do Terraform. We got everything terraformed. It's nice. I go run Chekhov, and Chekhov says, hey, that database isn't encrypted. And it's like, yeah, I know it's not encrypted. Whoever created it 4 years ago didn't turn on encryption. That's why encryption set the false in my code. I could flip it from false to true. That would be nice. It would also delete the database and recreate it, right? And so what you'll see is with Chekhov and all these tools, it's going to tell you what you did wrong from, the best way of doing it. And I'll show you a couple of different ways that you can kind of turn off these warnings. So you can turn them off at the pre-commit level. You can also turn them off just in your code for different things. So we'll fix some of them, and then maybe we'll just kind of mute one of them and say like, oh, that's a constraint of our business. Like we can't change that. But it is one of those things to just watch for, because it's going to tell you everything, and it's not going to take into account whether something's going to cause a recreate or not. So let's hope we got some insecure stuff in here. Oh my gosh, what are we doing? Okay, so you see all this Prisma Cloud stuff. So Chekhov is an open source tool. Just give you a little bit of history here. Chekhov is an open source tool, and it was built by, oh gosh, I can't remember the team's name. I think it began with a B. I'm looking around to see if Chris, my co-founder, is in here because he knows what it is. But they got bought by Prisma Cloud, and Prisma Cloud got bought by somebody else. So that's why you're kind of seeing all this Prisma Cloud IO stuff in here. So that's just where like all the policies are stored. And so it looks like we've got, oh my gosh, we got a bunch of them in here. Oh my gosh, look at all this stuff. So a lot of stuff to fix. So we may or may not hit all these. Actually, those ones passed. We should probably turn off. The ones that passed because we don't care. We're gonna look at the ones that failed. So you can see here there is failed AWS launch template ensure instance metadata service version 1 is not enabled. So it's telling us, hey, you shouldn't have used that version. Now, if we pop open this doc, I'll just pop this here for anybody who wants to take a look. It's not literally following along. Let me go ahead and add a different screen here. I'm going to share a browser window instead. We can take a look at this. And so what's really cool about a lot of these tools, yeah, so Chekhov was built by somebody who got bought by Prisma, who got bought by Palo Alto. The way of startups. So what's cool about this is Chekhov will actually give you a URL to what the problem is. You can pop over here, and what you'll see is, it's got a description of what the problem is. I think it said that we were using version 1. We should have been using version 2. Now, this is a question. It's like, okay, well, do we have, and it shows you how to fix it in CloudFormation and how to fix it in Terraform. Terraform also applies to OpenTofu, right? So it's showing us the different things that we should be doing here. So I'm going to read about this one really quick. I'll be honest with you guys. I do almost everything in Kubernetes. I very rarely use VMs directly. So this is something I'm going to learn about right now, and we'll see if we can either fix it and get Chekhov to be happy, or if it's something that's going to cause a big rewrite, I might just comment it out. So it looks like we're using an instance metadata service as on an on-instance component used by instance security access. You can access instance metadata from a running instance using one of the following methods. Request response is session oriented. Okay. True. It's prone to local misconfigurations. Open proxies, open NATs, and router server side. Is one of the way local software might access local only data. Fix build time, AWS instance, HTTP tokens. Whether or not the metadata service requires sessions tokens, the mechanism used for instance metadata version 2 can be optional or required. Okay, that's it. It's telling me I just got to add this little tiny block here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to be pure caveman mode. I'm using ChatGPT like everything else. I don't even know how to write software anymore. I just copy and paste things. I used to copy and paste them from Stack Overflow. Now I copy and paste them from a robot that's going to take my job. So we're going to take that. I'm going to switch back over to the code. We'll try this, see if it makes the test pass. Now, here's the catch, kind of like with the encryption thing. I don't know what this is actually going to do until I run it, right? We're changing attributes of our Terraform, right? So this is not something that I would actually just kind of blindly do in a infrastructure as code that I'm going to be shipping to prod. I'd probably, run it locally, ship it against some pre-prod environment, ship it against local stack, make sure that it's not going to cause a recreate. And what I normally do in this scenario is I would actually stand up my code as is, then make this change and run a plan to see what it does, right? So if you don't have like your own version of the infrastructure, like this is a scary thing to just kind of start tossing stuff in as you're walking through this, because you don't know what's going to cause a recreate on existing infrastructure. So I definitely always suggest making sure it hits some pre-production environment when you're making changes like this, especially around attributes you're not familiar with, before merging it into the code base, just so you can see what the plan would be against existing infrastructure, so you know what's going to happen when it hits prod. Sweet. So let me switch back over to my code real quick. There we go. Sweet. Okay, so this was on this was on my AWS instance. So let me grab this guy real quick right here. And it was suggesting adding that to AWS instance type. There we are. So it looked like it was just a top level field. I'm going to plop it on here. And did it say, anybody remember, did it say turn them both on or just one? Oh, look at that autosave. Okay, so let's go ahead and rerun this to see if this one goes away. We had a couple other ones we'll come back to in a second. This looks like there's about 7 of them there. Okay, in order. Launch template this. Sure, it is not enabled. Isn't that what I just did? Oh, it's on the launch template. Okay, this is the launch template this time. This isn't the instance. Okay, so I think we fixed the instance one. Let me undo that. I want to see it one more time. Okay, let's comment this back out. Okay, sweet. So there we are. So yeah, I want to just grab the code really quick so I could grab that a second time. Boop. That's 88. That's not what I'm looking for. So ensure all data stored in this launch configuration. Okay, it looks like we got the one that it was. So that did turn off. Now again, I don't know what happens to this instance. I don't have my week 10 stood up, right? So this is something that if I was actually walking through it, I would run it without this config, add this, and then rerun it, check the plan, make sure there's not a recreate before moving forward with this. But that looks like that got it. So we can kind of walk through here, and I would. This is one of the challenges for week 10 is going through and making these corrections. But what I want to do is we'll look at how to silence one of these. So I'll just kind of look through one of these, see if I can find one that looks good to silence. And then we'll put in essentially a little magic comment in the code, and that should silence it. And then I might actually just silence them all so we can walk through the rest of this without having this pop up constantly, because I think we're going to get one other fix here on TF-lint when we look at it. So let's go ahead. Description's not a good one to turn off. We should just write those descriptions. That's definitely not something y'all want to watch me do, write descriptions. But let's do this instance metadata here. Ensure all data stored in the launch configuration or instance elastic being sought is stored securely encrypted. So I'll take a look at this policy here. I want to see what it's suggesting. I definitely agree you should be storing everything encrypted, but let's just see what this one is. Let's see what the change suggests. And essentially just setting the root block to encrypted. Root block encrypted true. So I would actually be curious if this causes, my bet is, just based on what I know about RDS and encrypting, I bet this would re-encrypt the device Oh, this is the launch configuration. This is the launch configuration. That's probably safe to add. So we probably just copy and paste this one in. This one's pretty straightforward. I really want to find one that I know is going to cause a recreate to silence, but maybe we'll just plop this one in too, and then we'll recreate. We'll comment out the next one. So this one's on the launch config. Launch config. No, launch template. Launch template. Oh no, this is on the instance. Sorry. What is this week? I'm gonna change here real quick. Change directory AWS. Sweet. I can't remember what the checkoff run command is. Geez, really great docs. I appreciate them. I'm just trying to run it manually so I don't have to see all the output from pre-commit really quick. Just do checkoff. I'm quite the good speller. Come on, checkoff. Runs checks, but always returns exit 0 using either. No, I don't want that. Run all external checks. And his code blocks. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, never mind. We'll just do the pre-commit. There we go. All right. I was trying to save myself a bunch of console output, but I guess I'll just deal with it instead of remembering what the command was for checkoff. Okay, so I think that one should be, yep. Optimize is another one it's suggesting. Detailed monitoring. Okay, so detailed monitoring. Let's go ahead, and this is the one that we're going to come in here and we're going to comment this one out. So the root block one we solved. There's a bunch of other ones in here, but this is one that I want to come in here and just silence really quick. So this is also on the AWS instance. We're going to go ahead and do ensure that there's a detailed monitoring. Let me take a gander at what the solution is. Gosh, it's another really silly one. Gosh, there's no really good ones in here that can comment out that aren't just silly to do. So this one is literally just another single line of code. It's adding monitoring true to the AWS instance. We can comment that one out. We can comment that one out. It's checkoff code 126. Yeah, checkoff code 126. So let's just do this. Okay, so now let me see if we have any other 126s in here. Oops, that's what I'm going to do. Sweet. And so now we can see that it grepped it twice because it caught it in a code block for something else. But you can see here, skipped for resource blah, suppress and comment, need an example of skipping a check. So this is another one that's just simple to turn on. I don't imagine it would have, sorry, I'm talking over here because this is where my StreamYard is. I don't imagine this one would have actually caused a recreate. It wouldn't have changed anything about my resource that would have changed the way that I use it, right? And like those are the things I'm usually looking for when I'm silencing one of these alarms, right? And so the comment will usually be, this is what I think is the best way to go about this is you found something that will cause a recreate, just skip it for now, right? Don't make everybody panic about it. Or you have something that's going to change the way it works, right? Like maybe you're using an endpoint off of some database in AWS, and maybe it's a deprecated field or something like that. But if you remove that endpoint, it's going to break 10 apps and you don't have time to deal with that, right? So commenting that out. Now, what I would do when I comment these out, what I do personally in my own code is I would not just put a reason why, unless it was just like we don't do this. Right, like our company does not care about this one whatsoever. Maybe that's worth a comment. But anything else, I usually make a ticket for it, like almost immediately. And I do this in our code as well. And I will put the comment as the ticket number, right? And so like now I actually have like some work. It's like, hey, we should be doing this. I can tie it back to this thing. Like it's in a place where people can see it. And I think that's important to do. It's nothing to do with Terraform, nothing to do with OpenTofu, nothing to do with Chekhov. But I feel like that's one of those places where, as operations engineers and DevOps engineers, we get to give some feedback to product managers and the people that are kind of dictating our workload, that there's work to do besides what they want, right? And it's very hard for somebody to understand how much debt that we've accrued if they're not seeing it in their Jira or their Pivotal tracker, right? And so capturing our own debt in comments like, hey, somebody should fix this later, that just is more debt for us. But if I'm putting a ticket in there, now somebody has to deal with the fact that I've said, hey, there is a problem. I've linked it to some code, and it's in your face to see. It needs to be worked on. We need to set aside the time for it. And I think it's one of the easier ways. Sorry, this is me on a soapbox for something people ask me about all the time about like how do we get more time as ops engineers to do the right thing. We need to figure out ways to market to the organization that there's problems. And I think this is one of those places that's really beneficial. So I wouldn't just leave a comment here. I like to be a bit more proactive about like getting a ticket ready, let people know where it is, link back to the code where the fix needs to happen. But for now, we can kind of just go through here and comment these out. Now, what I want to point out is while we're looking at Chekhov, there are a lot of other tools that are even in the Tofu utils pre-commit hooks by default. So there's tfsec and Trivy. They're the same tool, though they rebranded it. TRIVY, I believe. And there's also Terrascan. So there's a lot of tools. And so what I see a lot of times is like we've already picked an IaC tool. One of my little slogans is like you pick an IaC tool and you immediately open Pandora's box. Like you've made one decision and it feels like, oh, we made the decision to use Terraform or OpenTofu, like we're ready to go. You have a million other choices to make after you've decided on that tool. And one of the ones that comes really quickly is like, what IaC, like security and scanning tools do I use? Honestly, I think for most organizations, especially if you're just starting to dip your toes into OpenTofu or Terraform, just grab Chekhov. It's great. Now Trivy, Chekhov, et cetera, like, they're not mutually exclusive is kind of the problem, right? Their value becomes a bit more clear as your organization grows and you start facing new challenges. Chekhov is often the first step. It's easy to integrate. It's great for catching Terraform and OpenTofu misconfigurations. It's good for enforcing a lot of compliance stuff. But kind of as your infrastructure scales and your security teams become more complex, like that's where you start reaching for these other tools like Terrascan, because you can make custom policies with, OPA. I think Terrascan supports OPA, or Trivy, because you want to do vulnerabilities in container images and dependencies and like build SBOMs and stuff like that, right? So they all kind of overlap a bit they all will scan your Terraform, your IaC tools, but then they all have these other features as well, right? And so you get into this interesting place where it's like, are all three tools going to end up with 100% feature coverage between the three of them? Probably not. But like some of the tools feel like that they're doing two things at once. It's like, it's your all-in-one tool for container scanning. And it's great, but it's slower. And Chekhov is really great in my pre-commits, right? Now, what I think sucks is when you see teams that start to use two or three of these tools and all the tools are complaining about like the same line, right? That you've decided you do want to skip. And now you end up with like three little comments, like telling all three tools not to worry about it. And I feel like when you get to that point, it's like, you need to start picking a tool or picking how to use a tool. Chekhov isn't going to be adding, I don't think they're going to add container scanning anytime soon, right? So maybe you use, Trivi's container scanning for your containers, and maybe use Chekhov for the Terraform part. So I think it really comes down to the tools, it comes down to the team and what they need, where your organization is, and you may use 2 or 3 of these together, and that's fine. I think it's just when you start to get to that pain point where it's like, holy shit, CI takes 15 minutes because it's running 3 things, scanning 25 Terraform modules. Then you say, okay, which one is going to be responsible for scanning my Terraform? They're all up to date. They're all great. I'll put in the week 10, I'll put a little grid of kind of comparing the 3 different tools that you see in pre-commit here and what their benefits are. Chekhov is really nice for adding other rules. It's pretty much YAML, which is great. I think I always confuse Trivia and Terrascan. Let me look at their logos. That's my easiest way. Trivia does SBOMs. Terrascan lets you write OPA, right? And so it's just like what? Which one do I want to use? Is your team familiar with OPA? Then Terrascan might be great. If they're not familiar with OPA and YAML, maybe you stick with Chekhov, right? So a lot of different tools in there. You can kind of toss in any one you want. I'm not sure if any of them require API keys. One of the ones that you will see as we go through this that requires an API key is Infracost. I think you can get that API key for free from them. Let's go ahead and kind of keep rocking through it. So the next one we want to toss on here is tofu lint. So I'm going to turn off the Chekhov one just because we know that there's about 7 things in here that we need to fix. And I'm going to toss in TF lint. And this is another one that's named for Terraform, but will work fine here. Grab week 10. Okie dokie. We got some stuff that we got in trouble for. So there's a couple of things here to fix in the linting. Again, this linter, if you go and look at TF lint, they have a list of all the rules. I think there's like 25 or 30. If you are someone who works on works in like Golang or Node, and you're used to Prettier, or you're used to Go Critic or something like that, one of those tools that is like exhaustive and telling you what you've done wrong, that's not TF lint. TF lint doesn't have very many of them. But it has a couple of really good ones. So you can see one of the things I'm missing here is a required version on my DB instance, right? So let me pop this open. Okay, it looks like a Terraform required version. So it looks like I don't have my version of it's detecting it as Terraform required version here. So required version, I don't know what version I'm using. Yeah, 1.8. I'll tell you what, I always get these pinnings wrong between all the different programming languages. Let's go ahead and see if that fixes it. Command TF lint, we done. Boom, required version. I think that worked. What was that? That was my DB instance. I just want to check to make sure it didn't pass it, even if I got the syntax wrong. Let me just hop in here really quick. I guess my validate passed though. My validate passed. Oh, I don't have validate, and I took it off because it's cumbersome. Sweet. Okay, that's good. Okie doke. So let's do it and rerun pre-commit. And I think the other one was I was missing a required version from the instance as well. So I'll just throw that in here really quick. And then the last one was, I think in output, we used a syntax that is questionable, deprecated, questionable, sus, as the kids say. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab, where is this at? Oh my gosh, we got it all over the place. I'm looking for it in week 10 now. There we go. So what I believe it's complaining about, list items should be accessed through using square brackets. Is it complaining that I didn't do this? Is that what it's complaining about? Let's go ahead and take a look at the rule. I think it's complaining that we use the asterisk there. Asterisk there. Let me take a quick look at this. I'll drop the rule over here as well. Okie dokie. So list.0 reference. Yeah, that's what it is. It's just saying that it would have preferred that we did it this way. I think they're deprecating that syntax. Okay, so let's rerun this. Ooh, all green. Oh my gosh, you know what all green means, right? You can just push it in the prod now and everything's going to work. That's not what that means whatsoever. So we got that in there. So that's a decent little pre-commit, right? With our validate and providers lock, let's pop all these on now. Check off at the end because it's the noisiest. It's the one that we're still going to get some output from. But like this is a pretty good tooling stack, right? Locally, at least, right? Now, I think that one other one that you may want to consider here might be InfraCost. Now, I think InfraCost is a really great one to toss in. Like I said, you do need that API key. But one of the things that's a little, I think, misleading about InfraCost in a resource module versus an infrastructure module, difference being like your resource modules, like things that just have modules that just have resource in it. They don't have a provider in it, right? That's a module that's intended to be shared and reused. And then you have like your infrastructure modules where you actually have a provider configured and it's gonna be the top level thing that runs. I don't know that there's a ton of value of putting InfraCost into a resource module because like there is no information about how it's going to run. I think where InfraCost becomes most valuable in non-serverless environments is when you actually have like a TF vars that you can build a plan with. That's really good because it'll give you an idea of the cost for that configured infrastructure. Running it on an environment where you don't have an idea of how it's going to be configured, like you're going to get a number, but I mean, RDS can cost you $30 a month or RDS can cost you $30,000 a month. It depends on what values you set in there. So I don't know that I'd toss it in the CI pipeline or even a pre-commit for a resource module, like a shared module that I'm building, but it's definitely something I would put in my CI/CD for something I'm going to be shipping to prod. And if you're doing a lot of serverless stuff, you do have to do a bit more with it. So you have to tell it like what your expectations of use are, right? A Lambda is free up to 1 million requests. Over 1 million requests, it starts to cost you something, right? So you have to give it some information about like how you'll be using those serverless resources so it can get an idea. So it looks like this dumped out. Still have the noisiest checkoff in the world. Wait, did I rerun? Did I rerun this or did I rerun checkoff? What did I run? There we go. Passed. Everything was green except for checkoff. So that's good. So we can just kind of go through there, add those descriptions or whatnot. I'm not going to do that since we only have a few more minutes left. Definitely switch. I thought I only had 30 minutes of talking through this stuff, but apparently I talk a lot more than I thought I did. So we can kind of go through here, work through the rest of these, but I definitely want to open it up for questions. I see Justin. I'll catch the end of this when the recording drops. Thank you for putting this on. It's been really great. I appreciate that. Thank you. I do want to talk about just a few other things here, though, while we're letting that run. So, some of the other rules that we have in this pre-commit, there's a bunch of other tools in there. InfraCost is the other big one. But I think the other thing that is going to be really key as you're kind of scaling the adoption of this tooling across your organization is that next step, and that is figuring out like how do you get the stuff that you already have like in here, and that's why we're doing this workshop on December 18th. This I definitely suggest signing up for. But I think like the next step, like after you've gotten a good layout of how you want this to work locally, like for your development, the next step is kind of going and figuring out like how you're going to lay out your modules in Git and what CI you're going to use, like what CI tooling you're going to use. This is probably a good set of CI tooling as well. There's even things where you can like run your pre-commit as a part of your CI. So if you want to make this like your thing. But I think the other big thing, like as you're starting to roll this out across your org, is thinking about like what your Git footprint looks like for your modules, because you're going to have like two main types of modules, but you're honestly in like larger organizations, you're going to get a Git sprawl that's pretty intense, right? So a lot of orgs at larger scale, they might make a Git repo per resource module, like the ones that you share, right? And I like that pattern because it lets you put on versioning, right? So all of Terraform and OpenTofu's versioning is based off of Git tags. And so what that means is if you're doing a mono repo of your shared modules and you tag something as V1, everything is V1 because it's done at the tag level, right? And so some orgs like to go towards that repo model per each because they can put that strict versioning on there. But the reality is now you have, I don't know, if you're a mature org, you might have 30, 60, 90, 100, 120 just Terraform modules. And like that is extremely cumbersome to get semantic versioning, right? And so I think one of the things you have to do is like kind of look at your org and think like, I don't know, it's funny. Like you look at a couple of microservices that you're running. Is microservice B using version 2.37 of microservice A? Probably not. Like, are you doing really strict, right? If you're not doing like strict versioning across your org, like, do you need to be doing strict versioning across your modules? And my argument would probably be no. I think you're definitely still pinning. Like you're pinning to a SHA or something like that. What I like to do is pin to a SHA and then just occasionally remove it and see if I've got a big diff. And if not, then I'll take that new SHA from main. If I get a little bit of a diff, maybe I'll work through the code there. But what you're always kind of looking at is on your operations and DevOps and platform teams, you realistically have a lot less time than your engineering partners, right? And so you're always looking for ways to kind of make more time for you to be able to do the right thing. And I think picking how you do your infrastructure layout in Git is one of those things that can absolutely eat up a ton of your time if you're not careful. And so I'd say definitely on smaller teams where you're not churning a lot of Git or you're not churning a lot of Terraform constantly, I would just put everything in one repo. Like make one repo where all of your shared modules are. You know, it's great, it's fine. You're not going to get that versioning, but the question is like, do you need it, right? Like if you need that versioning, you're creating a huge maintenance burden for you in Git repos and CI, right? If you want to change the version of your Terraform that you're using for all of your modules, guess what? If you have 30 Git repos, you're changing 30 YAML files. Now the trade-off there is if you have one repo, right? And we saw pre-commit running right here, a bit slow. If I've got 30 shared modules in there and I'm running this 30 times, like I have to start getting clever about how I have my GitHub Actions set up or whatnot. So it's only running it on things that are changing. Otherwise you end up with these CI times that take forever, right? So kind of as I was saying earlier, like once you choose an IaC tool, like you're not at solution, like you're at the easiest question you had to answer. What tool am I going to use? And now you have a ton of really hard questions. And that's why we have such a huge gap in our industry around IaC adoption, because it seems like it's going to be so simple to just grab a tool and get coding. But there's all these other organizational and like cultural decisions you kind of have to make with these tools to make sure it scales for your team. So I think starting out with one repo for all of your shared modules is an absolute great way to get going. It's also, as you reach scale, like you can actually do some stuff with your mono repo to have strict versioning, right? So I've seen teams do things like in each module, they'll just make a version file, capital version, and they have a symver number in it. And part of their CI is whenever that module is pushed, it'll publish it it'll copy that directory and push it to S3, right? And so like you can get versioning like when you push it to S3, because now it's going to have like the number in the URL, right? I wouldn't suggest copying it in your Git. It's going to get tedious. It's going to get so painful to do minor and patch level across a couple of different minor versions. So I'd say just lean towards one on the get-go. And on the other side of this, you have your infrastructure modules, and those are the ones that are going to be grouping all those shared modules together, right? If you have a mono repo today for your Node app, then you probably only have two Git repos. You have the one where all your infrastructure ones are, and then you have the one where your shared modules are, right? But if you've gotten to the point you've got 10, 15 different microservices, and they all have their own queues they're using and databases they're using and like secret stores that they're using, like now you have 16 repos, right? You have a repo, each of your application repos probably has some Terraform in it, right? And then you have this one main shared repo where you're kind of pulling all your modules from, right? And so like that's another place where you start to see this, the pain of the sprawl. And like that one's just a part of the job, unfortunately. Like if you're truly giving people self-service and you're letting them manage their infrastructure, like you're gonna have these Git repos everywhere. And that's where, this one, the 10 weeks talk of like, that's where the sales pitch comes in. Like that's where tools like MassDriver come into play. It's like kind of handling that additional sprawl that is now put onto the engineers who are going to be using these, right? So I'd say definitely check us out if you haven't had the chance. I think the other place that you'll see sprawl, that was my sales pitch, by the way. The other place you'll see sprawl, and this one I think is pervasive in our industry. and I think is a problem in our industry. And I really wish people would stop suggesting doing it, because it is literally us just holding on to something from 7 years ago. 7, 8 years ago, 5 years ago even, Terraform did not support workspaces. So if you had staging in prod, your options were going and grabbing something like TerraGrunt or copying and pasting directories of infrastructure as code. Right, so I'd have a staging directory, I'd build everything out, I'd feel good about it, I'd copy and paste that entire directory and rename it prod. That sucks. And there's still plenty of docs, there's still plenty of best practices sites that still suggest doing that. And we got to cut that out. Like, that is the thing that's just going to continue to kill adoption in this industry, because it is just too tedious. If I make a change to staging and then I make a change to prod, and I put different modules in there, like, I literally have double the code. I have to remember to copy that thing over to prod constantly. I have to copy it over to prod constantly, right? For my users, the variable interface and even the output interface may have changed between that directory of staging code, that directory of production code. Now I have to learn your abstraction 2 times or 3 times or 4 times, or however many environments that we have. Leaning into workspaces and saying, I've got one module that says how I build this thing, or how I build this set of infrastructure, and I push variables through it to produce what I want. That's how you get to code reuse. That's not dry. That's just good practices. You're getting parity between your staging and production environments. And I think that right there is where you can really start to understand your environments. If you're taking this approach of, I've got one bag of code that stands up my microservice and all of its databases, whether it's staging, prod, or a preview environment, and I start to feel pains in keeping parity in that module, I've learned something about my environment. I've maybe even learned something about my infrastructure as code. I probably need to pull something out into a separate module, right? Maybe I need to pull my database keys out of that and make that a separate module, separate execution, separate state file. And that's fine to do. Smaller state, composing infrastructure together is safer. It's more tedious because you do need an orchestrator like us and some of the other people in the space, but it's going to be the easiest way for people to grok what's going on, the easiest way for people to make changes without these massive blast radiuses, and the easiest way to be able to have state files and modules that are manageable and consumable. Like, looking at some of these customers that I've worked with that have a module that have like 200, 300 inputs, it's like, you're not getting self-service. Like, you as an ops person thought about this in a very opsy way. You're never going to get the time to solve the real problems in your org, because developers are always going to be asking you how to use your Terraform module. And what we need to be doing with these is designing modules that make sense as like shippable units of software with the right abstractions for our business, that I can hand something to a developer and I can say, you make a database whenever you want, and I trust you because the code inside I trust, right? It's very hard to trust somebody when you say, hey, make any HTTP call you want to AWS and make whatever you want, and be sure to call me at 2 a.m. when it's broken. So that's kind of my last little bit there. I know that we went over. Definitely want to hang for any questions if anybody's got stuff like from any of the sessions that we've had in the past, anything that you didn't see in this workshop that you would have loved to have seen. I'm happy to put together other workshops. They're fun to do. But yeah, besides that, I'll be shipping out the email a little later today with the full walkthrough of week 10, the code video and whatnot as well. Thank you, Ben. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them. I'll hang for a couple more minutes, and then I will maybe catch you all at the importing infrastructure workshop. Yeah, thank you, JT. Okay, no questions. Well, I'm going to take this lovely face off the internet. I'll catch you all at the next one. Thanks so much.